In this section, I'm going to talk about the pathogens. So pathogens are any agent, such as a virus, bacterium, fungus, protozoan, or helminth, that causes disease. Nearly 2,000 different microbes can cause disease. And this is a list of the top causes of death. So we see heart disease, cancer, chronic lower respiratory diseases, accidents, stroke, Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, influenza, and pneumonia. Nephritis, nephrotic syndrome, and nephrosis, and so forth. So you can see how we have respiratory diseases. Those include respiratory infections. And we have influenza and pneumonia, which is one of the top 10. And that's in the United States. Worldwide, again, we see respiratory infections. And then we see like diarrheal diseases and tuberculosis. Those are infectious diseases. Those are caused by microorganisms. So influenza, pneumonia, diarrheal diseases, and tuberculosis. Communicable versus non-communicable diseases. Communicable disease can be transmitted in communities or spread from person to person in a community. A non-communicable disease cannot. So an example of a communicable disease is COVID-19. Influenza. So communicable diseases, those can be spread readily from person to person. Non-communicable cannot, such as tick-borne diseases, malaria. So you can't get malaria from a person. If a person comes up to you and they have malaria, you can't directly get malaria from them. It requires an insect to draw their blood and put their blood into you in order to transmit Plasmodium, which causes malaria. Diseases like Lyme disease. If a person has Lyme disease, they can't simply just give it to another person. Lyme disease is a non-communicable disease. Malaria kills about 450,000 people each year. It's transmitted by mosquitoes, and the prevention of the infection is through the use of bed nets, which, although inexpensive, are too expensive for poor families. So they put netting over themselves. Some use prophylactic drugs that prevents them, if they're in a place where it's at high risk, it prevents them from getting the infection. Usually people that live in endemic areas or areas where malaria is found, they don't take the prophylactic drugs because they'd be taking them every day. So getting malaria over there is as common as getting a cold. Some people, however, get very severe and chronic malaria and get complications from malaria and end up dying. So about 450,000 each year die of malaria. New or emerging diseases, as well as older re-emerging diseases, are also increasing. So Ebola, AIDS, hepatitis C, viral encephalitis, and COVID-19 is another one. Polio, leprosy, and parasitic worm diseases have largely been eradicated. Certain diseases, once considered non-infectious, are now found to be caused by microorganisms. So gastric ulcers caused by Helicobacter pylori. So H. pylori is a microorganism that if it gets inside of your stomach, it can set up shop. It can live there and it can survive your stomach acid. It's able to survive very high temperatures. It prefers a growth temperature of 45 degrees Celsius. So our normal body temperature is 37 degrees Celsius or 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. So they prefer a little bit warmer temperature than what our bodies are, but they live there and they can cause gastric ulcers. There's a link between certain cancers and bacteria and viruses. One of the most common ones that you've probably heard of is the human papillomavirus, HPV, and its ability to cause cervical cancer, anal cancer, oral cancer, and other types of cancers. Coxsackie virus has been associated with diabetes and schizophrenia. MS, OCD, chronic artery disease, obesity have all been linked to chronic microbial infections. Microorganisms, even your natural microorganisms that live in your bodies all the time, have the ability to affect your mental state and everything about who you are as a person just by producing certain proteins that they produce. So they're starting to look at and evaluate the human microbe composition to see if the presence of certain microorganisms can cause, has a propensity for certain mental illnesses or mental altercations. So microorganisms have a significant impact on humans. The subtler side of microorganisms, today we are discovering the subtler side of microorganisms and the quiet, slow, destructive diseases that they can cause. Female infertility can be caused by a chlamydia infection. Chlamydia has the ability to not show symptoms. You can have asymptomatic presentation, and then all of a sudden, the damage that was caused internally leads to female infertility. Liver cancer, hepatitis viruses, predominantly hepatitis C, has the ability to hide inside of the body and go undetected for 60 plus years. So you could have hepatitis C for your entire life and never know it. And then all of a sudden you have liver cancer. And cervical cancer, like I mentioned before, the human papillomavirus. An increasing number of patients with weakened immune systems are subject to infections by common microbes not pathogenic to people. Most of those microbes are fungi. So a lot of times when a human gets infected with a fungus, it's on accident. And fungi don't really do a good job at surviving inside of the human body. But if you have a weakened immune system, or if there's something else that your body is fighting, then those fungi have the ability to cause those types of infections. In that case, they're called opportunistic pathogens, and we'll talk more about those a little bit later. Drug-resistant microbes also contribute to an increase in infectious diseases. It used to be that a person would get a gonorrhea infection, and they would go to the doctor, get tested. The doctor would look under the microscope at the discharge and say, yep, you have gonorrhea, here's an antibiotic, and send you home. Now, patients that get gonorrhea go to the doctor, get an antibiotic, and it doesn't work, and the infection persists and gets worse. And then they go back to the doctor and say, hey, this antibiotic didn't work, and they get a new antibiotic, and that one also doesn't work. So we're running out of options for treating these infectious diseases. There's also infectious diseases that are multi-drug resistant and are resistant to kind of our last resort drugs, so it makes them almost impossible to treat.